Random likes the dark. A skeptic is someone who has not yet experienced it firsthand. A Jason Hunt. Monsters and ghosts are real. They live in us and sometimes they come out victorious. The clinking of plates and glasses echoed in the room. As dinner drew to a close, the Marvins family and friends gathered to leave, expressing their gratitude for the incredible meal. They sampled garlic butter, glazed ribeye, filet, perfectly seasoned and tender potatoes, and steamed carrots with leftover glaze. For those who abstained from alcohol, there was a choice of an aged 1953 red wine or refreshing Arnold Palmer. The Marvins were glad of their company, but the late hour made them crave rest after their long preparation. When the guests left, the Marvins felt like great hosts. Relieved that they no longer needed to impress anyone, they began to prepare for bed. The kitchen was clean, dishes washed and leftovers neatly put away. Turning off the unnecessary lights, they turned their attention to the daunting task of getting Elliot to bed. Night after night they fussed, leaving the Marvins exhausted and irritated. Tonight they were determined not to put up with it. It remained a mystery why Elliot resisted sleeping in his room every night. He had always sought refuge in his parents' bed, but after a long day, they wanted to spend a few intimate minutes together without disturbing. Elliot, you will sleep in your own bed tonight, Mrs. Marvin announced. Wait, Mom, please, I promise this night will be your last, I swear, Elliot begged. What is it you're promising, boy? Mr. Marvin asked. Pass me about it being a sin, sir. Then is it right to swear in the same sentence when you mention your mother? No, sir. And what did your ma admonish you to do? She said I should sleep in my own room, answered Elliot. So are you going to disobey your mother's instructions? Never, sir, Elliot replied with a note of despair. The thought of lying down in his own bedroom terrified him. They did not understand, and even Elliot himself could not fathom what he was witnessing. There was no answer or solution to the inexplicable things he was encountering in his room. Can I at least turn on the lights tonight? Absolutely not. Having the lights on will keep you from sleeping, and I wouldn't be foolish enough to let the electric bill skyrocket, Master Marvin objected. Darling, tomorrow I'll buy you a night light, but can you be brave tonight, suggested Mrs. There's no need to cherish him. He must face his fears like a man, insisted Mr. Marvin. Now that's the reason he can't stay in his room. It's the dark. Everyone was afraid of the dark as a child. Even my grandfather was afraid of the dark until he was 83. Mrs. Marvin defended herself. Steve, your grandfather fought in Vietnam? Heck, in Vietnam, I'd be afraid of my own thoughts if I were him. Don't forget he stabbed Uncle Lenny on New Year's Day, Mr. Marvin objected. No, I'm not suggesting that he sleep in our room. I'm just saying we'll buy him a lamp for his room tomorrow, Mrs. Marvin suggested. No way, I'm not raising a girl. Either he put up with it or I let the dog take his bed and make Elliot sleep in the back seat. Rover doesn't complain or bark anyway, Mr. Marvin stated. Elliot turned to his father, stunned and not knowing if he was being serious or joking. He realized that, regardless of the context, he should sleep in his room. As his parents continued to discuss his supposed cowardice, he felt himself begin to faint. Memories of a few nights ago came flooding back, sending shivers down his spine and making the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. She's waiting for me, he whispered to himself. What does she want from me? Suddenly his father's voice brought him back to reality. Go to your room at once. Elliot knew his father meant business when he used... Wait, no, please, sir, Elliot pleaded. There's an order, Mr. Marvin pointed upstairs, making it clear that Elliot should go to his bed. It was strange to Mr. Marvin that he had to resort to hand gestures to make Elliot understand what needed to be done, while Rover simply obeyed on command. Yes, sir, Elliot hurried up the stairs, wanting to avoid further punishment. Once upstairs, he paused, hoping to overhear his parents talking. He really wished they would stop being disappointed in him, if only they knew. "You mustn't treat him like a soldier," Mrs. Marvin voiced her concerns. "The boy needs to learn," replied Mr. Marvin. "Learn what? That he ought not to be a girl or a mere child?" "Louise, he's just a boy. He must learn to accept challenges like this one, or Mr. Marvin stammered. "Otherwise what?" pressed Mrs. Marvin. "Otherwise he'll end up like I did before I was drafted into the army. What's wrong with that? I fell in love with this man. He was kind, considerate, and just like everyone else," she explained. "I couldn't be like everyone else. I was constantly being pushed away. I was afraid to take risks. I was a coward. I don't want my son to be like that." Mr. Marvin's voice shook with emotion. "Do you think that asking for help is an act of cowardice?" "Absolutely, yes." "Nonsense. Asking for help is not an act of cowardice, neither is experiencing fear. It simply means you're human," she objected. "Not today, dear. I don't need your philosophizing about what defines a person as human. Let's just go to bed." It was a good night until Elliot had to ruin it. Mr. Marvin's words caused Elliot to feel resentful. He hurried to his room before his parents came up the stairs. "It's not his fault. His father, not the general," Mrs. Marvin objected. "Well, more like a commander," Mr. Marvin quickly corrected himself, realizing his mistake when he saw the disapproving expression on his wife's face. "Sorry, it slipped. I'm going to make you sleep on the couch." No, I'm sorry, dear. Exactly when we get to our room, I'll be in charge, understood?" Mrs. Marvin winked playfully. "Yes, ma'am," replied Mr. Marvin eagerly, looking like a little boy anticipating the opening of Christmas presents. They went to their room to engage in that activity that makes adults feel euphoric. Elliot heard them close the door and talk. His father hurried toward the bathroom and ran into Elliot, who still had the light on. "Boy, don't make me go in there and turn off the light myself." "No, sir, I can do that," Elliot replied. "Then go ahead." "Yes, sir." Elliot got out of bed and turned off the light. He immediately turned it back on to look around the surroundings and see if he needed to find anything. Then he turned the light off again and hurried back to bed. He hid under the covers, hoping could shelter him from any night terrors. An hour passed and sleep still did not come to Elliot. He continued to wrap himself in the blanket. Sweat trickled down his face. He was afraid she would return. She had awakened him from his sleep a few nights ago. There was nothing but pure evil in her face. Suddenly Elliot heard a scratching sound coming from the corner of the room. "Don't look, there's no need to look. Ignore the curiosity." But he couldn't help himself. He needed confirmation that it wasn't her. He looked up and saw a demon wandering around his room. Fear fled within him, and she felt it too. She was only a silhouette lurking in the corner, untouched by the soft rays of natural light. With a wave of her hand, she showed Elliot her formidable claws. A wave of terror swept over him, his heart lurching, his smile bared teeth sharper than any blade, and saliva dripped from her mouth like an enraged hound. Even Cujo would pale in comparison to the ferocity of her fan. Her appearance was like a barren branch in the season of falling leaves, exposing a hidden twig that was always there, like a mysterious Houdini trick. Her body seemed to fang vulnerability, luring her prey close. The fragile eyes that hid her true strengths were deceiving. When least expected, she would overpower her victim, making her smaller than she really was. The vicious creature approached Elliot, making no secret of its intention. She knew he was powerless to stop what was inevitably going to happen. Every deliberate move she made increased the tension, heightening his fear. Her movements resembled those of an elderly man with the predatory instincts of a hunter, and as she approached, the details of her face became more and more distinct. The sunken eye sockets, devoid of any visible orbits, puzzled Elliot. How could she see him? Why did her face appear to be weeping? Perhaps it was the curls adorning her eyelids that created the illusion of tears. Her eye sockets resembled caves, as if they could serve as pencil holders of swords. Elongated fingernails scraped along the edge of the bed near Elliot's feet, disturbing his calm. The demon was getting closer to him with every moment he dared to take. So he closed his eyes, hoping that by depriving her of his sight she would disappear. The sounds of her footsteps grew louder, her presence drawing closer. The vibrations from her clawed fingers penetrated deeper into the mattress with each passing moment. He continued like this until he felt the oppressive heat of her body and felt her breath hovering over him. In horror, he involuntarily lost control of himself and peed on himself, making a puddle of urine under the blanket. The acrid odor filled the room, but they paid no attention to it. She knew that nothing could mar this horrible endeavor. As she approached, the Dean leaned in, her face a few inches from Elliot's forehead. A helmet-long tongue emerged from her mouth and began licking his forehead. Elliot's limbs were numb, the shock robbing him of his mobility. His heart beat irregularly, stopping occasionally. A new stream of urine spurted out of him. Damon snatched up her razor-sharp fingernails and pressed them forcefully against his eyelids until they made contact with his vulnerable eyeballs. She intended to force him to look at her, whether he wanted to or not. An agonized scream escaped his lips, but it seemed eerily quiet. He couldn't even hear his own voice, but the creature's satisfied panting echoed in his ears. With a brutal motion, it ripped his eyelids open, exposing both eyes. Bloody tears streamed down his face, which the demon swallowed greedily like the last drops of whiskey from a bottle of Jack Daniels. If only in his blurred vision he could make out her presence. Her face was a sickly grey hue, patches of darkness like stains on a cheese pizza. Wrinkles furrowed her face and resembled ridges on it. His skin had a rough texture, yet it tore easily, reminiscent of Eskimo bark. Continuing her grim assault, she pressed her fingernail against his left temple, piercing his flesh with gradual effort. It felt as effortless as if a warm knife had cut through butter, and blood flowed in beads. Elliot tensed, hand trying to move, his desperation palpable, but he remained perfectly still. It was as if a cruel spell had entangled. "It's all right, Elliot, don't fight it," the demon whispered softly. Elliot continued to sob, the tears intensifying the pain, streaming down his newly wounded eyelids. The demon lowered herself onto his thighs, then tore a piece of flesh from his leg. With a grim look, she began chewing the piece in front of him, savoring his agony while blood oozed from the injured limb. The demon fixed her gaze on Elliot, savoring the unrelenting suffering he was inflicting on him. The demon realized his pain, for it was his suffering and torment that fueled her insatiable hunger. What she made him see, however, surpassed the horrors of death itself. She forced him to look into her empty eye sockets, revealing to him an unfathomable sight. He saw indescribable evil and horror across world and generations. He witnessed grotesques of torture, murder, rape, and the atrocities of war. The cruelest of all was that he also felt the excruciating pain that every soul that ever existed in the world was experiencing. The weight of their suffering consumed him, becoming an eternal torment that he longed to be rid of. For here seconds passed, but for him they stretched into an endless eternity. The thoughts she had put in his head overwhelmed him. capable of breaking the resolve of even the bravest of souls. She had surpassed the capability of mortals, leaving behind only terror and despair. Elliot's spirit came to the brink of surrender. At that moment, he wished only for death. The demon moved closer to his ear and spoke the last word. I am yours and you are mine. I am yours and you are mine. I am yours and you are mine, repeating the refrain in an eerie rhythmic chant. A few hours later, about 7 o'clock in the morning, Mrs. Marvin, feeling unwell after the events of the previous night, came to check on Elliot. She intended to inform him of her intention to buy a lamp for his room. When she opened the door, however, she saw a sight for which he was not prepared. The smell of urine and carnage overwhelmed her senses. The remains of her son were lying all over the room, scattered pieces of plaster. Overwhelmed with shock and horror, Mrs. Marvin let out an agonizing, piercing scream, calling for her husband. Hearing his wife's screams, Mr. Marvin rushed to her and immediately fell to his knees as he saw the horrifying scene before him. A wave of guilt came over Mr. Marvin. He questioned his wife's decision to let Elliot stay in his room. What they didn't know was that the demon craved another victim. It craved someone young and untainted. It could attack anywhere lurking in the shadows. The safety of their children must be protected from the darkness. After all, they could be the next victims, or maybe they were already lost. Obscurity often makes people skeptical, making it easier for darkness to overpower virtuous and unsuspecting souls deemed